He looked me right in the eyes and said, "We don't have space for you. Get out." My son, my only child. For a moment, the room disappeared. I couldn't hear the clatter of dishes. I couldn't see the faces around the table. All I could feel was the weight of those words, like they had landed straight on my chest, pushing the air out of my lungs. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just smiled. A small one. Quiet. Almost too still. The kind of smile you wear when you finally see something clearly, and you know there's no going back. I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked out of the house I had helped pay for. The house I had folded laundry in, baked bread in, told bedtime stories in, to my grandchildren, while their parents worked late downstairs. I walked out with nothing but my handbag and a wool coat I'd had since the 90s. The next morning, Aiden lost everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You see, it wasn't just about the words. It was the way he said them. Calm, practical, like he was announcing a change in the dinner menu. "No room for you here, Mom." As if I was luggage that had overstayed its welcome. Vanessa, his wife, didn't say much. She just sipped her wine, like this was long overdue. The kids, Miles and Ruby, froze. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew something had cracked. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask why, but I already knew. This had been building for months. Whispers behind closed doors, strained smiles, missed eye contact, little signs that I tried so hard to ignore because I thought family meant something deeper. I thought everything I gave, my time, my savings, my home, was a shared legacy, something we built together. Instead, I was now being told, after raising him through night shifts, in funeral tears and bad dreams, that I no longer fit in their life. I was clutter, an inconvenience. I wish I could say this was one of those explosive fights, screaming, crying, broken dishes. But no, it was clinical, cold, like I was being evicted from a space that was never really mine. I remember brushing my hand along the banister as I walked out. I had helped pick that banister. Oak wood. I remember the day it was installed. Aiden was so proud. Vanessa had taken photos. Back then, I still felt included. Back then, I believed I belonged. The door clicked shut behind me, and the silence hit harder than anything Aiden said. I didn't have a plan. No suitcase, no hotel booked. I just walked. It was evening, and the air had that early winter bite. My knees ached with every step, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long while, I felt strangely awake. It's funny, isn't it? How you can give someone everything and be discarded without a single tear. But that night, I didn't fall apart. I didn't beg. I didn't even feel revenge. I felt something else. Clarity. Because what Aiden didn't know was this. He thought I was powerless. A burden. But he had no idea what I was still holding on to. No idea what was written on those old papers I kept tucked away. No idea how, in trying to erase me from his life, he had just triggered the one thing I'd never wanted to use. By the next morning, everything he thought was his business, his accounts, his name, was no longer safe. And I was finally free. I used to believe that love was enough, that if you raised a child with honesty, kindness, and every ounce of your strength, they'd carry that love with them into adulthood. I used to believe my son loved me that way. His name is Aiden Whitmore. He's 45 now, sharp, confident, says all the right things in front of the right people. The kind of man who shakes hands with his left hand and hides a contract in his right. But once, he was my little boy. I was 27 when I had him, and I never thought I could love anything more than I loved that child. His father, Samuel, had these deep eyes, that always calmed me down. He passed them to Aiden. I still remember the first time I held him. He had a full head of dark hair, and he cried like the world owed him something. He was fierce, even then. Samuel died of pancreatic cancer when Aiden was 14. It was fast, too fast. One moment we were planning a fishing trip, and the next, I was learning how to live without the only man I'd ever loved. I didn't get the luxury of mourning for long. I had a teenage boy to raise, bills to pay, and a hole in my heart that never fully closed. I worked as a school librarian for over 30 years. Not the kind of job that builds wealth, but it was steady. I loved books. I loved kids. I loved the quiet corners of that library, where I could pretend, just for a moment, that I had things under control. When Aiden got into college, we celebrated with a cheap bottle of wine and Chinese takeout. I used my savings to help him pay for tuition. When he dropped out 2 years later to start a tech company, I didn't question him. He said, "I want to build something." And I believed him. I sold the house Samuel and I built together to help fund that dream. Aiden promised he'd pay me back. Said it was a loan. Said I'd never have to worry again. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. What kind of mother wouldn't invest in her son's future? His company took off, fast. Some app that streamlined payment processing for small businesses. He was giving TED-style talks by 35, appearing on podcasts, hosting dinners with investors. I was proud, of course. How could I not be? But I also started to notice something shift. Vanessa came into the picture around the time his company started to really grow. She was pleasant, polite, always on. She never called me Mom or Elora, just you, like I was a shadow in her carefully lit life. Still, I stayed in my lane. I visited during holidays, brought casseroles, knitted birthday scarves for the kids. I knew I wasn't flashy or ambitious like Vanessa. I didn't come from money, but I thought if I stayed kind and useful, I'd always have a place in their lives. Then came the fall. 2 winters ago, I slipped outside my apartment during a snowstorm and shattered my hip. The doctor said I needed 6 months of recovery, and I couldn't do it alone. Aiden offered, said it was temporary. "Come stay with us," he said. "We'll take care of you." So I did. I moved into their guest room, the same one where I used to read bedtime stories to Ruby and Miles. I thought I'd be there a few months, then find a nice senior community with gardens and book clubs and friendly neighbors. But things changed. Little things at first. Vanessa locking the pantry at night. Aiden forgetting to tell me when they were leaving town. Family dinners where no one asked how my day was. Then came the larger cracks. Vanessa hinting that maybe it's time you had your own space again. Aiden spending more time behind closed doors, talking in whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. And now I was sitting here, in the home I helped build, with money from the home I gave up, being told I no longer fit in. I guess the hardest part wasn't hearing my son say those words. It was realizing he had been preparing to say them for a long time, and I had just been too blind to see it. It happened on a Sunday evening, the kind where the house smelled like garlic bread and baked lasagna, and the rain tapped gently against the windows like a lullaby. I had spent the day folding the kids' laundry and helping Ruby with her science project about volcanoes. It felt like a good day. Normal. Warm. Dinner was quiet at first. Vanessa had opened a bottle of wine, and Aiden was on his phone, as usual. Ruby asked if we could watch a movie after dinner. Miles was picking at his salad. And then, like a knife slicing clean through silk, Aiden looked up from his plate, cleared his throat, and said, "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time you find another place to live." The room stilled. At first, I thought I misunderstood. Surely, I'd missed a word or taken something out of context. But then, Vanessa chimed in, without even looking at me. We just don't have space anymore. It's been over a year. The guest room's supposed to be Aiden's home office. Guest room. Office. I'd become a line item on a floor plan. My hand trembled a little as I reached for my water glass. I didn't know what to say. Not yet. My eyes moved to the kids. Ruby's fork was frozen midair. Miles looked down, ashamed. They weren't supposed to see this, but they did. Aiden leaned forward. His voice dipped into that familiar CEO tone, the one he uses when he wants people to think he's being reasonable. We're not saying this out of anger, Mom. It's been long enough. You're doing better now. You can walk again. You're independent. That word, independent, hit me like a slap. I had raised that boy to be independent. I had made him strong, taught him to never rely on anyone who could abandon you. And now, he was using that same lesson to push me out. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Vanessa sighed, then added, in that polished voice she always used around guests, "There are so many nice communities for seniors now. Some even have yoga." Yoga. I had given up my house, my savings, my name on the deed of their business, their home. I was the reason they were even in this 5-bedroom house in the suburbs. And now I was being offered a brochure and a yoga mat. I looked at Aiden again. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't see my little boy. I didn't see the child who used to fall asleep on my chest after nightmares. I saw a man who had made a decision. One he had rehearsed. One he believed I wouldn't challenge. My heart didn't break. It solidified. I could feel it. This quiet, spreading cold that came not from pain, but from clarity. I knew then that the love I had poured into him had run dry on his end a long time ago. The silence was thick, but no one tried to fill it. No apology, no hesitation. Just an uncomfortable shuffle of forks on plates. I finally spoke. "Okay," I said. Just that. One word. I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, and stood. Vanessa looked relieved, like I had made things easier. Aiden nodded, almost as if he was proud of my composure. But inside me, something had shifted. A plate had cracked. A bridge had burned. And I had no intention of pretending otherwise. Ruby looked up at me, wide-eyed. I managed a smile for her. The soft kind that says, "This isn't your fault," because it wasn't. Not hers, not Miles, just theirs. I left my dinner untouched, walked to the hallway closet, and reached for my old wool coat. It still smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. I put it on slowly, deliberately. No one tried to stop me. As I reached the door, Aiden said, "We'll help you find a place, Mom. Just give us a little time." I didn't turn around. "No need," I said, and I stepped into the rain. The rain hit my face like tiny needles, cold and relentless, but I barely noticed. I walked slowly, each step a strange blend of freedom and heartbreak. My legs were still healing from the surgery. Every few blocks, I had to stop and catch my breath, but I didn't care. The pain in my body couldn't compete with the ache in my chest. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't even feel the need to. What was there left to cry over? My tears had dried out somewhere between packing school lunches alone and selling my home to fund someone else's dream. I ended up at a small diner I used to visit with Samuel when we were younger. It was open 24 hours. Tucked between a pharmacy and an old tailor shop. The waitress didn't recognize me. That was a relief. I asked for tea and sat in the corner booth by the window, dripping wet and invisible. That's when it really hit me. Not just the insult, not just the dismissal, but the realization that I had become disposable. I stared out at the empty streets and asked myself a question I hadn't dared ask in decades. What do I have left? I had no house, no savings to speak of, no warm room waiting for me. My identity for the last 45 years had been wrapped around being Aiden's mother, Samuel's wife, a helper, a giver. I had lived so long in service to my family that I hadn't noticed I no longer had one. The tears finally came. Silent ones. The kind that don't roll dramatically, but just appear and keep coming. No sound, no sobbing. They soaked into the collar of my coat. I thought about the old house Samuel and I built when Aiden was 5. We picked every color together, every drawer handle, every creaky floorboard. When we sold it to help Aiden with his startup, I told myself it was just a house, bricks and paint. But it wasn't. It was a life. It was a history. And I gave it up without question. I thought about Samuel, how steady he had always been, how he would have handled all this, probably calmer, quieter than I was. He was never a loud man, but his silence was always full of substance. I missed him with a sharpness I hadn't felt in years. After about an hour, I opened my handbag to look for tissues. That's when I noticed it, tucked between some receipts and a bottle of hand lotion. An old key. It was to the safe deposit box I hadn't opened in almost 2 decades. It belonged to a time when Samuel handled the finances and kept, just in case, documents stored safely away. I remembered going with him to the bank after he updated his will. I remembered the lawyer's serious face and Samuel squeezing my hand, saying, "This is for later, hopefully much later." And then, just like that, a switch flipped in my mind. What if I still had something left? What if I wasn't as powerless as they assumed? I sat in that booth for another 30 minutes, staring into the steam of my tea as a plan began to form. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of something far older and deeper. Survival, dignity, truth. When someone discards you like an old coat, it shakes something loose in you. It reminds you that you used to have teeth, a spine, a voice. I may have been quiet all these years, but I was never weak. I just forgot how to stand alone. I paid for my tea and left a tip bigger than the bill. The rain had softened by then, turning into a mist. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking again. This time, not aimlessly, but with purpose. By the time I got to the apartment of my friend Miriam, I already knew what I needed to do. She opened the door in her pajamas, took one look at me, and without a word, stepped aside to let me in. Later that night, I lay awake on her couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, hypnotic circles. I had spent my life giving, bending, sacrificing. Now, for the first time in decades, I was going to take something back. The next morning, the sky was overcast, a dull, pale gray, the kind that makes you forget the sun exists. I sat at Miriam's kitchen table, nursing a cup of weak coffee and watching the steam curl like ghosts. I hadn't said much since I arrived. Miriam didn't press. She's the kind of friend who knows that silence can be more comforting than words. Miriam Holtz and I go way back. She was one of my students years ago. Shy, bookish, always asking questions. She grew up, went to law school, and turned into one of those rare people who could quote Jane Austen and legal codes in the same breath. We reconnected when Samuel died. She sent a handwritten letter saying how sorry she was and how much she remembered our library chats. We stayed in touch ever since. When I told her what had happened the night before, she didn't gasp or pity me. She just said, "Elora, do you still have the key?" I nodded slowly, reached into my handbag, and placed it on the table between us. It was brass, old, worn around the edges, and heavier than it looked. We drove to the bank just before lunch. The vault area hadn't changed in 20 years. Same humming fluorescent lights, same outdated carpet, same hollow click of metal drawers sliding open. The safe deposit box was right where I remembered. Number 147. I slid the key in, turned it, and pulled out a long metal drawer filled with documents that hadn't seen the light of day since before Aiden had his first apartment. I opened the stack slowly, my fingers trembling. There, on top, was a crisp manila envelope, Samuel's handwriting still sharp on the front. For Elora. In case inside was a set of legal papers. His original will, signed and notarized. I had a copy, of course, but this was the full version. It named me sole executor of all shared marital assets. He had been thorough, as always. Every investment, every holding, even the joint retirement account we never touched. But that wasn't the big surprise. Below the will, folded carefully in a plastic sleeve, was the original real estate transfer agreement from when I sold our home and gave the proceeds to Aiden. I'd thought the house was fully transferred, but apparently, Aiden had never filed the final ownership papers. On record, the house was still in my name. My breath caught. I reached for the next folder. This one held business incorporation paperwork, the LLC for Aiden's tech company. My name was there, clear as day. He had used my credit and my initial $280,000 investment to launch his startup. I had signed on as co-founder, at his insistence, just for the paperwork, but he never changed it. On paper, I was still a 50% owner. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from something else, something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Leverage. I looked at Miriam, stunned. He never took me off any of it. She was already flipping through the pages. He probably never thought he needed to. You were just his mom. He probably assumed you'd never ask. A long silence passed between us. And then, softly, she said, Elora, he made a mistake, a big one. I closed the box gently and leaned back in the stiff bank chair. The weight of years lifted from my chest. But in its place came something heavier, resolve. This wasn't revenge. I didn't want to destroy him, but I also wasn't going to be cast aside like a used napkin. I had poured my life into helping Aiden succeed. And when he decided I was no longer useful, he tried to erase me. But now, the very things he'd ignored, my name on a document, my signature on a check, my silent trust, had become the pillars of his downfall. As we walked out of the bank, Miriam put a hand on my arm and asked, So what now? I didn't answer immediately. The breeze felt cooler now, sharper, like it carried purpose. Finally, I said, Now we make a few phone calls. That afternoon, I sat at Miriam's kitchen table with a legal pad, a mug of chamomile tea, and a new kind of energy humming in my chest. It wasn't anger, not the kind that burns. This was colder, clearer. The kind of calm that settles in when you stop hoping people will do right by you, and you start doing right by yourself. Miriam had spread the documents across the table, the house deed, the incorporation papers, Samuel's will. She was circling dates, highlighting clauses, murmuring to herself in legal shorthand. I stared at Aiden's signature. So familiar, so careless. He'd signed everything with that same smug confidence, never once thinking he'd need to worry about me. That was his first mistake. He didn't file the property reassignment, Miriam said, flipping to the next page. It's still technically yours. Not just the equity, the title. I nodded. And the business? You're listed as a co-founder, an original investor. There was never a dissolution or buyout. If he's made revenue under this structure, you're entitled to half, unless he restructured without filing proper notices. Which he didn't. We paused. I took a slow breath and said the words that felt like unlocking a new part of me. Let's freeze him. Miriam's eyebrow went up. You're sure? I'm sure. And I was. He'd wanted me out of his life. Now he would find out what that meant. We spent the next 4 hours building a quiet, deliberate plan. No drama, no confrontations. Just paperwork, signatures, and strategy. Step 1. Initiate a temporary freeze on the business accounts tied to my name as an investor. Miriam drafted the request to the bank that held the company's accounts. She also flagged an inquiry to the Small Business Administration to begin a formal valuation and ownership dispute. Step 2. File a temporary stay on the house deed. Since the property had never been legally transferred from me, I could request a stop on any refinancing, remodeling, or sale attempts until ownership was properly clarified. Basically, Aiden couldn't touch the house without my permission. Step 3. Revoke the power of attorney Aiden had over my health and financial decisions. It was a small piece of paper I had signed after my hip surgery, never thinking twice about it. But that kind of access was a risk now. I called my financial advisor, one of Samuel's old colleagues, and arranged for a full audit and new safeguards. Step 4. Update my will. That part was the easiest. Aiden and Vanessa were removed entirely. My grandchildren, Miles and Ruby, were added under a clause. Their trust funds would only be released if they visited me once a year until age 18 and wrote me a letter about what they'd learned that year. Poetic, precise, personal. By the time the sun went down, the plan was in motion. We didn't need to warn Aiden. We didn't need to argue. The paperwork would speak louder than I ever could. As I sat back in the chair, my muscles sore, but my heart strangely still, Miriam looked over at me. You're being remarkably calm about all this, she said. I smiled. Not the forced kind, not the bitter kind, but something quieter, stronger. I'm done begging for space in a life I built, I said. Let him feel the floor shift under him, just like he pulled it out from under me. And I meant it. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse in a long gray coat, filed my paperwork without a tremble in my voice, and stepped out into a different version of myself, one that no longer asked for a seat at the table. I was building my own. The morning I left Miriam's place, I dressed deliberately. Slacks, a soft cashmere sweater, the same pearl earrings Samuel gave me on our 30th anniversary. I brushed my hair, tied it back, and looked in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see a woman trying to prove her worth. I saw someone who already knew it. It was time. The filings were complete. The legal notices had been sent. The wheels were already turning, quietly and efficiently. I boarded a rideshare to Aiden's house. His house, as he liked to call it. But in the eyes of the law, the deed still carried my name. My partial business ownership had been verified. The accounts were flagged for compliance review, and the trust fund conditions for my grandchildren had already been submitted. I wasn't there to fight. I wasn't even there to argue. I was there to exit properly, on my terms. As I stepped onto the familiar porch, the wind carried the faint scent of rosemary from Vanessa's planter box. Funny how something so small could trigger so many memories. Sunday dinners, birthday candles, the first snowfall I watched with Ruby from the kitchen window. I rang the bell. Aiden opened the door, clearly not expecting me. His eyes darted from my face to the small duffel bag at my side. "Mom?" he asked, voice cautious. "What are you doing here?" "I came to collect the last of my things," I said calmly. There's a box in the closet. It has Samuel's letters and the quilt from our wedding. He looked confused, then stepped aside. Vanessa appeared behind him, arms folded. "That's fine," she said, like it was her permission I needed. "We were wondering when you'd come." I ignored her. I walked into that house with dignity wrapped around me like armor. Every framed picture on the wall, every piece of furniture I had helped buy or decorate. But I no longer felt sentimental. It wasn't a home anymore. It was just a house with fading warmth. I retrieved my box, turned, and paused. "I've also filed paperwork," I said, looking at Aiden directly. "As of yesterday, the business accounts are under legal review. I've frozen access pending evaluation of my ownership. And since you never completed the title transfer on this house, I've requested an injunction. You won't be able to refinance, sell, or list it without my written consent." Vanessa stepped forward, her voice rising. "Wait, what? You can't do that." But Aiden, his face had gone pale. He knew. "I can," I said. And I did. He stared at me, stunned. "Why are you doing this?" I tilted my head. "You told me to leave, Aiden, so I did. But not before remembering what I'm owed." Vanessa scoffed. "This is manipulation." "No," I said, steady as stone. "This is accountability." I walked to the door, my hand resting on the knob. I turned back once more. "I loved you more than anything, Aiden. I gave you everything I had. But when you treat someone like they're disposable, you forget one thing." He looked at me, silent. "They remember how strong they used to be." And then I walked out. By the end of the day, the bank had frozen 3 accounts tied to the business. Aiden's partners received a notification of a legal dispute that could impact ownership shares. The property injunction put a full stop on a second mortgage he'd been negotiating without telling Vanessa. He tried to call. I didn't answer. Vanessa sent 3 emails, one angry, one pleading, one just clarifying. I archived them all. There was no need to yell, threaten, or curse. That's the thing about dignity. It doesn't shout. It moves quietly and lets consequences speak. That night, I sat in a quiet studio apartment in a retirement village overlooking the river. It was small, but clean, peaceful, mine. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and let the silence wrap around me. Not as a punishment, but as freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, by myself. It didn't take long for the panic to begin. 2 days after I walked out of that house, Aiden's first email came through. The subject line was simple: "We need to talk." I didn't open it. Then came the calls, 3 in one day, then 6, then 12. I watched the screen light up with his name, over and over, until it almost became background noise. I never picked up. Vanessa sent a voice message the following day. She tried to sound composed, but I could hear the edge in her voice, tightly stretched, like piano wire. "Look, Elora," she began. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this could really damage Aiden's reputation. Do you really want to be remembered as the bitter old woman who ruined her son's life?" Bitter old woman. That one made me smile. She still thought I cared about appearances, about being invited to brunches I was never really welcome at, about staying silent so no one would feel uncomfortable. But this wasn't about reputation anymore. This was about truth. By the end of the week, Aiden's company issued a statement to its stakeholders, a temporary restructuring due to an unexpected legal matter. His partners were furious. One of them, a woman named Claire, whom I'd met once at a launch event, called me privately to ask if I was truly listed as a co-founder. I confirmed. She said nothing else, just exhaled sharply and hung up. Meanwhile, the house, my house, was frozen. The second mortgage Aiden had secretly applied for was denied due to the active ownership dispute. Vanessa's dream remodel for their kitchen, the one she'd been bragging about for months, was postponed indefinitely. I heard through Miriam that Aiden had hired an attorney, young, aggressive, probably expensive. They sent over a notice requesting a private discussion to resolve ownership issues amicably. I didn't respond. Instead, I waited. Then, one rainy evening, almost poetic in its symmetry, there was a knock at my door. It was Aiden. He looked tired, not in the way a man looks after a long day of work, but the way someone looks after a long string of lies finally unravels. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I stepped aside, let him in, sat across from him at my modest kitchen table with a teapot between us. It reminded me of when he was small and would sit across from me after school, swinging his feet under the table, telling me about math class and playground drama. But there was no innocence here now. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. I didn't respond. I thought it was just time, that you'd want your own space. I raised an eyebrow. "Did you think I couldn't feel it, Aiden?" The way Vanessa looked through me. The locked pantry. The dinners where no one asked how I was. He sighed. "We didn't mean for it to feel like that. Things just got complicated." "You made it complicated," I said quietly. "You asked me to walk away from everything to help you. And when it was no longer convenient, you cut me out." He winced. "Okay, you're right. I messed up. But this? Freezing my accounts? Getting lawyers involved? That's harsh." I leaned forward, calm and steady. "No, Aiden. What was harsh was standing in the home I helped pay for and being told I didn't belong there anymore. What was harsh was realizing my son saw me as a burden, not a blessing." He looked down again. I could see it in his face. Shame, regret, fear. "Please," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Can we fix this?" I sat back, number. "But we can move forward. Just not the way you're used to." I explained the new terms. I wouldn't pursue full control of the company unless he attempted to retaliate. I would allow partial refinancing of the house if he bought out my equity. I would not be manipulated, guilted, or talked down to. Those days were over. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I'm doing it because it's the only way you'll ever learn what it feels like to stand on your own." He nodded slowly. There were no more protests, no angry outbursts, just quiet acceptance. A silence that said he finally understood something I had waited years for him to realize. I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, I said one last thing. "You taught me that family is conditional. So now you get to live by those same rules." Then I closed the door. It's been 6 months since I closed that door. 6 months since I stopped asking for a place in other people's lives and started building one of my own. I live now in a small cottage near the Oregon coast. Nothing extravagant, just 2 bedrooms, lots of natural light, and a porch that catches the sunrise just right. I have wind chimes that sing on breezy mornings and a garden box I fill with herbs and marigolds. It smells like peace. I wake up early. I read. I walk by the water. I cook for myself again. Not just to feed someone else, but because I want to taste something good. It's strange how easy it is to forget that you deserve that. I volunteer twice a week at the local library, shelving books and helping children find stories they love. It feels poetic, coming full circle to the place that once gave me joy, before everything else asked me to set that joy aside. The first time I sat in that library's reading nook, a little boy handed me a book about dragons and asked if I would read it aloud. I did. Halfway through, I had to pause, not because of the story, but because I realized I was smiling, Really smiling. Not the kind you wear to avoid discomfort or make others feel at ease. A real one. Deep. Unfiltered. I've reconnected with old friends. I even adopted a rescue dog. He's part shepherd, part who knows what. And I named him Sammy, after my late husband. He sleeps at my feet while I write letters to Ruby and Miles. Letters they'll get every birthday, filled with memories, stories, and soft advice I hope they carry into their lives. As for Aiden, we don't speak much. The terms were honored. He bought out my share of the house. The business continues without my interference, though I still technically own a portion. Legally protected, quietly held. He sent a birthday card in April. No apology. Just 3 words scribbled inside. Hope you're well. I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, but because I am well, and I don't need to explain that to anyone anymore. The final version of my will is done now. Aiden and Vanessa are no longer listed, but Miles and Ruby each have trust funds that will unlock only if they come see me once a year and send me 1 letter about what kindness means to them. I hope they do it, not for the money, but for the story they'll come to understand when they're old enough. The story of a woman who gave and gave until one day she remembered how to give to herself. Last week, I sat on my porch during sunset. Sammy curled up beside me, a warm cup of tea in my hand, the ocean wind kissing my face. And I thought about everything that had happened, not with anger, but with awe. Because here's the truth. People forget. Sometimes the greatest freedom doesn't come from being loved the way you want. It comes from loving yourself enough to walk away when you're not. I don't regret giving Aiden everything I did. I regret believing he would protect it the way I had. But that regret no longer rules me. It's just part of the story, part of what shaped the woman sitting in this chair. Breathing easier than she has in years, I've learned that letting go isn't the same as giving up. It's choosing peace over proof, healing over history, dignity over desperation. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is never needing one. You don't need permission to choose yourself. You only need courage. And once you do, no one can take that peace from you again.